Writing clearly, and why some writers don't. So this lecture is taken primarily from Joseph Williams' Style, Lessons in Clarity, and Grace. And Williams begins with the statement, "It's good to write clearly." So, if it's good to write clearly, as Joseph Williams says, why do people write unclearly? And Williams has some answers to this. One is that we're too afraid of making errors. I think this is a common thing for all of us, that we've written something for a class. We poured our hearts into it, and we get it back, and it's full of these red marks of correcting our grammar, our punctuation, our spelling, and it feels as though the teacher really didn't care about anything about what we wrote, only how we wrote it. And that's not a pleasant feeling. And as Williams puts it, we start to approach writing the blank page as though it were a minefield where there's these traps that we may fall into, and we get so self-conscious about what we're writing and how we're writing it that we forget about writing clearly and writing to let our readers know what we want to say. There's a simple answer to this, which is don't worry about it, at least not in the early stages. That first draft, nobody needs to read it but you. In fact, the first few drafts, you're probably going to be the main reader of those first few drafts. I advise you to find some close friends or classmates who will give you feedback on it, but it's not for mass consumption. And at that point, you don't need to worry about making grammar errors or anything like that. What you want to do is get ideas on paper and make them as clear as possible. Polishing it up, making it neat and grammarly and correct and all of that, that can come later. Don't worry about it at the beginning. The beginning is about clarity. Another reason that sometimes we write unclearly is because a topic is unfamiliar. It stands to reason that if we don't understand what we're saying, we can't possibly help our readers to understand what we are saying. There's a really simple solution to this. Do your homework. Understand it before you start writing. Another reason that people sometimes write unclearly is simply that they're unaware that they are doing it. We look at our writing and we think, that's cool, I understand it, that's really clear to me. But the problem is, it doesn't need to be clear to you, it needs to be clear to your reader. And that's the trick. And I think that's probably the main reason that writers don't write clearly, is that it's clear to them. And so much of what we're going to be doing over this course of this semester is learning how to recognize what will be clear to our readers. And that means, to a large part, developing empathy for our readers so that we can see how our readers will look at our writing. That also means that a good writer has to be a good reader. Over the course of the semester, I expect you to read critically and think about what other writers do and how it affects you. Another idea that my students often bring up is that they feel like sometimes writers are trying to make their ideas sound impressive. Honestly, I don't have a lot of patience for that as a reader. I don't appreciate it when ideas that really aren't that complex are written in a way that is complex, that makes them sound more complex than they are. But as a teacher, this is a challenging one for me because, in fact, research shows that it works. There have been studies that have shown, for example, that you take the exact same ideas, the exact same argument, and in one case it's put in very simple, clear terms, and in another case it's put in complex, Baroque sentences. And the truth is, a lot of teachers will grade that more complex one higher than the simple one. That's unfortunate. And so I'm just going to say that as a person, I'm much more impressed by somebody who can take impressive ideas and put them in terms that anybody can understand. And there are some writers who are great at this. I can point to, for example, Stephen Hawking. Brief History of Time is an exceptional piece of writing because he takes incredibly complex ideas and puts them in simple terms. In my own field, there's Steven Pinker, and I can highly recommend the book The Language Instinct, which is a great book because it takes really complex, difficult ideas from linguistics and puts them in terms that just about any educated person can understand. To me, that's impressive. And so, from that point of view, from a reader's point of view, and I think all of us can relate to this, that we would rather have people write to us in a way that makes difficult, impressive, complex ideas seem easier or feel easier to understand than vice versa. Finally, and this is something that Williams talks about a lot in his book and something that we'll come back to a lot in this class, is that we must gauge our audience. That to write clearly means writing for your audience, not for some other audience, for your specific audience. So a piece of writing may be good for one audience, but not for another. And knowing our audience is necessary to be able to write well, to write clearly. And there are lots of different audiences, and each audience is going to demand a different way of writing to make it clear. The next point I want to make is something that Williams doesn't really talk about much. It's more tacit in his book, but there are three aspects of writing that are crucial. There's content. Without good content, without some ideas, argument to make, you can't have any clear writing. So if you're not writing about anything, it's not clear. And there's style. Style is how we put things together, the way that we organize our paper, the way that we convey our ideas. And that's, again, crucial, that you can have great content, but if you don't put it in a way that your readers can understand it, then it's not helpful to our readers. And then finally, there's grammar, which is the tools of language. It's how we communicate in the first place. And if we don't use the tools of language, there's nothing to hang the rest of it on. We communicate our content through language, and the style is the choices that we make within grammar. And so in order to have these others, we need to have grammar. We need to have the knowledge of how language is put together in the first place. Finally, I want to look at some examples. So this example is from John Hawkins, and I'm just going to read it and then talk about it. This article examines cross-linguistic variation and filler gap dependencies, WH questions and relative clauses, from a processing perspective, and integrates research findings from psycholinguistics, language typology, and generative grammar. So my question for you is that clear to you? Do you understand it? I'll be honest, I don't fully understand it. It's not fully clear to me. I understand it for the most part, but to truly understand it, I would have to bone up on this field a bit, because the truth is Hawkins isn't writing to me, even though I'm a linguist, and even though I have studied filler gap dependencies. It's not my specialty. He's writing to syntacticians, and I'm not a syntactician. Moreover, he's writing to a specific group of syntacticians, those who are interested in filler gap dependencies. And I would argue that for that audience, this is a really good sentence. It's very clear for that audience. It's just that it's not clear for other audiences. Now, I want you to contrast that with another example, and I'll give you a little background here first. So there was a journal, a philosophy journal in Australia that used to hold this annual bad writing contest. The rules of the contest were that, first of all, you couldn't nominate yourself. Second of all, it had to have been published in the previous year, and it had to have been published in a reputable academic source. So a peer-reviewed journal or an academic press, such as a book published by an academic press or a collected volume. This is from 1998, when Judith Butler was one of the finalists in the bad writing contest. Let me read this to you. The move from a structuralist account in which capital is understood to structure social relationships in relatively homologous ways to a view of hegemony in which power relations are subject to repetition, convergence, and rearticulation brought the question of temporality into the thinking of structure and marked a shift from a form of Althusserian theory that takes structural totalities as theoretical objects to one in which the insights into the contingent possibility of structure inaugurate a renewed conception of hegemony as bound up with the contingent sites and strategies of the rearticulation of power. Now, if you're gasping for breath as you read something aloud, that's a bad sign. That suggests that the sentence should be restructured. Now, I don't want to pick on Judith Butler because, as I understand it, she's a brilliant scholar. But this is not a brilliant piece of writing. It could have been better. She didn't uphold her side of the writing bargain. She didn't make this as clear as it could have been for her readers. And in fact, by the end of the semester, you will have learned a lot of techniques for taking a sentence like this and making it clearer. It doesn't mean I would still understand it, because there's a lot of complexity in the ideas here. That's okay, but it could have been written better so that it would be easier to understand. This next one is from Homi Bhabha. And again, I don't want to pick on Homi Bhabha. Again, he's a brilliant scholar. I've listened to recordings of his lectures, and an incredibly articulate lecturer and really fascinating. But this piece of writing is not good. I'll talk a little bit about his reaction to winning this contest after I finish reading it for you. If, for a while, the ruse of desire is calculable for the uses of discipline, soon the repetition of guilt, justification, pseudoscientific theories, superstition, spurious authorities, and classification can be seen as the desperate effort to normalize formally the disturbance of a discourse of splitting that violates the rational, enlightened claims of its enunciatory modality. Yeah, I didn't understand any of that. Now, Homi Bhabha's response, and apparently he didn't take winning this contest with any sense of humor, his response is that he's writing at such a high level of thinking that only a few people in the world could possibly understand what he's writing. I don't buy it. Honestly, this sentence could have been written so much better. And that's the point, is that it's a choice that writers make to write clearly or not. Part of that choice is conscious if we understand how language works. And that's what this semester is going to be about. So we're going to conclude again with what Joseph Williams writes. It's good to write clearly, and anyone can. The semester is going to be about that second part. Anyone can, with the right tools. And that's what we're going to be working on during the semester, is developing those tools for writing clearly.